celebrating the power of possibility. Pilot Flying J and Halloran Hilton Hill present Anything is Possible. Today's guest, Jack McElroy, Part 1.
Welcome to another edition of Anything is Possible. I'm Halloran Hilton Hill. These, of course, are great stories about great people whose lives prove possibility. Jack McElroy is with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. I actually was born in northern New Jersey, but my family moved to Arizona, turned 5 in the hotel, and pretty much all my life that I can remember was in Arizona growing up.
Tell me about your mom and dad.
I had great parents. My dad, his parents were actually born in Ireland. They were immigrants.
Thus the name McElroy.
McElroy, it kind of fits, yeah. They actually were Protestants, although they were from a Protestant pocket in Southern Ireland. But he went into World War II. He was 18 years old, was in the Navy, was on a ship called the LST that actually you can see his ship in one of those famous pictures of Normandy Beach after D-Day. And he went to school on the GI Bill of Rights afterwards, became an accountant, taught us to watch our pennies. And my mom she's a very loving person. She's still alive. She's 92 years old, doing great. She's a puzzle master. She does jigsaw puzzles.
Really?
And anytime I go to visit, she will whip me in any game of my choice or her choice. She's sharp.
And does she do that to keep her mind sharp as well?
I think she does, but she also does it because she enjoys it. She just she actually lives with my sister. She's still relatively independent, but she has to limit her activity, and it's something that she likes to do.
What does she call you?
She calls me Jack. Yeah, it's I'm actually named after my grandfather. My name is John, but Jack, people may remember from the Kennedys, Jack Kennedy, John Kennedy. It was a nickname. It used to be more popular than you hear it now. But I was in 3rd grade, and there was 5 Johns. And at that point, my parents sometimes called me Jack, sometimes John, and I said, just call me Jack. And they did too from then on.
When did you learn to write?
When I was in high school, I hung out with some kids who got into playing around with words. We would write poetry for, challenge each other, as sort of a written poetry slam type of exercise. And it got me interested. I thought I wanted to maybe study English of some sort when I went to college. And when I got into my 2nd year, there was a class called Sophomore Composition, which was style. And Tom Wolfe and this era of new journalism was big in those days. And I read the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, and the style that he wrote in that book was just so amazing. And I started trying to kind of copy it to learn the elements of writing style. And from that time on, I was writing with what I knew I wanted to do.
And you wanted to do it because you read something that moved you, and you sensed the power of ideas, the written word as a way to move people?
Yes, and absolutely. I mean, communicating through writing is something that I've found to be very powerful. I always was a reader. I loved, I read books. I was one of those that, your parents tell you to turn off the lights so you're under the cover with your flashlight, continue to read. And so I always was fascinated by books and the written word. But beyond that, I began to enjoy the craft of writing, and maybe I got some of it from my mom and her jigsaw puzzles. And writing is putting things together.
Putting things together so they make a picture, right?
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah. That's good. Jack McElroy is my guest. You're watching Anything is Possible. Back with more in a moment.
Possibility powered by Pilot Flying J, Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel. Coming up.
September 11th, 2001, I went to the newspaper, and my predecessor, Harry Moskos, was actually out of town. So people turned to me. It's like, well, you're the boss, and I literally didn't know where the restroom was.
Jack McElroy, thank you for being on Anything is Possible. We love having you here. This is Jack.
Thank you.
Because there were 4 Johns, and we needed to distinguish.
Ended up as a Jack.
So this is Jack.
Yeah.
So you're in high school, you read something that moves you.
Yeah.
You love the craft of finding the right words, putting them in the right sequence or the right syntax, punctuating them properly, precisely, so that when they are on the page and the eye follows them, you're not reading words, you're reading feelings, emotions. It moves you. You are being informed. You learn. You grow. Somebody asked me the other day, do you love to read? I said, no, I love to learn, and reading is the crowbar that pries open the vault of wisdom.
Yeah, it's I have come to love writing, and I think it's worth it when you write to have some kind of sound to it, even if it's going to be read silently, which of course it typically is. But looking at rhythm and cadence and such in writing, that if you can establish that, you can actually do a better job of communicating ideas and bringing things out, because people absorb them through ways that they're not quite understanding that it's coming into them.
So, fall in love. Run me through your career, because.
Okay. Well, I actually, being in college, I actually wanted to write the great American novel. It's all about writing for me. So I was an English major. I minored in journalism to continue to work on my writing. But the journalism school was they were an intense bunch, and they were really all about what they were doing. They got excited and got me excited, but I graduated and I thought, okay, now the muse has to strike. I write this first novel, and I was working in a print shop, not using my degree, and one of my journalism professors came in a few months later and said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I work here. He said, why don't you try to get a job on a newspaper? And by that time I thought, well, maybe that's a good idea. So I applied to every daily newspaper in Arizona, and I got hired by the smallest one. It was a little paper called the Douglas Daily Dispatch in a town called Douglas, Arizona. And I went down there, and the first day I showed up, they sent me out. I interviewed a guy who was running for city council, and it was a very small paper, so the next day it was on the front page with my byline. I thought, oh, that was kind of fun.
I'm sending this home to Mom.
Yeah, I did. I did send it home to Mom. And it went from there. I worked in Douglas for about a year. Pay was terrible. I could barely survive. And I then expanded my range. I applied to every metropolitan paper in the Southwest. And I got hired at the Albuquerque Tribune. And Albuquerque is a city about the size of Knoxville, a lot of similarities actually. And spent a number of years there, got into newspaper management, middle management. I thought, well, I better learn more about this. So I went back to school at the University of New Mexico and studied management and got a degree in that. And then I've really been involved in newsroom management since then.
When did you come to Knoxville?
Came to Knoxville in 2001. My wife and I came here on September 10th, 2001 to see the city.
Wow.
And for her to make sure it was going to work. And at the end of the day, I told them I was accepting the job, so they scheduled a reception in the newsroom the following morning to introduce me to the staff.
And I know what happened the following morning.
We didn't have that reception.
Yeah.
September 11th, 2001, I went to the newspaper, and my predecessor, Harry Moskos, was actually out of town. So people turned to me. It's like, well, you're the boss, and I literally didn't know where the restroom was. And I said, you guys do what you would normally do. I worked with them. We put out an extra edition. We had it on the streets by noon, and I worked in the newsroom until about 1 o'clock that morning on covering 9/11. And
wow, what a welcome to Knoxville, and what a way to start.
it was, and the great irony was then, of course, we were stuck in Knoxville for a couple of days. My mother-in-law was taking care of our kids, and as soon as we could get out of town, we needed to try to get back. And we got to the airport as soon as it opened up, and the racks in the airport were the ones from the day before the bombing, announcing
Wow.
that I was going to be the editor, and it was that news was so insignificant
Right.
compared to everything else that had happened. It really put it in perspective.
I want to talk about the newspaper business, but I
Sure.
want to talk about you and your life. Tell me about your kids.
Well, I have 3 kids. They're adopted. They're African American, and they're the joy of my life. You know, nothing's been more important to me than being a parent.
Why did you adopt African American children?
We, you know, we thought we'd have kids like I guess anybody else thinks when they go into a marriage, if that's part. But it didn't happen for us. And we actually began exploring overseas adoption, which was happening quite a bit in those days. But in the course of that, we learned that there was a lot of waiting children who were African American in the U.S. And we looked at ourselves, we looked at our families, and thought, you know, we felt like we could provide an adequate home, and we would have support, and we were proud to be building a family through adoption, and we decided to do it. And so it turned out, as I've said, the fact that we could not have children in normal fashion turned out to be the greatest blessing in my life.
How was the reality different than the expectation?
Well, the
Or how is?
reality, it's really hard to tell what about parenting is related to adoption, is related to interracial adoption, is related to just parenting.
Right.
Okay, I think most of it is just parenting, but because every family has issues, and all kids have issues, but that's not to diminish. I came to realize that that my kids face some significant challenges.
Really?
And you know, there's challenges of being grown up black in America, and there's challenges.
Did you know that going in? I mean, or was it
Of course.
conceptual?
It was conceptual.
Right,
It was
but
conceptual.
then you're raising these. You have 3 black sons,
I have 2 sons and a daughter.
right? And all of them are African American.
They are.
Right.
Yep.
And what are their ages?
My daughter's 29, and I have sons who are 26 and 23.
Right. So it's one thing philosophically,
Right.
you know, conceptually, but then you start raising them.
Yeah.
And I wonder if at the beginning, just walking into a restaurant, for instance.
You know, we mostly were in the West. We didn't run into overt acts of
Right.
bigotry that were, you know, expressed to us.
But you know what's harder than the overt?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not this stuff. It's a million pinpricks.
Yeah.
It's the subtle it's the, how can I say it? It's the, oh. You know, do you know what I mean by?
I do.
Oh, and
You know,
why don't we take a break here, because I want to explore this, because this is very interesting to me, and this is a great story of possibility, because you and your wife say this is possible, this can be. You're watching Anything is Possible. This is Jack McElroy. We'll be back with more in a moment.
Coming up.
they seem to have accepted that this is their life and that they have parents, that we are their parents. And I don't think they ever really question that.
This week, our Home Federal Community Spotlight is on Friends of Literacy. Did you know that currently 1 in 12 adults in Knox County can't read above the 6th grade level? Friends of Literacy is fixing that. To learn more and see how you can get involved, visit friendsofliteracy.org.
Welcome back to Anything is Possible. This is Jack McElroy. He's editor of the Knoxville News Sentinel, but we're talking about you, the dad, right? And you have 3 children,
I do.
A daughter and 2 sons, all 3 of which adopted, and they are African American, and we're talking about that journey of transracial adoption. So they're little, you guys make the decision. I was asking you about what that experience was like, and you said we were mostly in the West, so we didn't run into it overtly.
Yeah, and I would understand that's in some ways more of a function of the total population that's out there, rather than the attitudes being necessarily different. But you experience something as a parent, people relate to you, oh, you're such a good person. No, I'm not such a good person, I'm just a parent. And in fact, I adopted for a range of reasons, some of which are selfish, because I wanted to have the experience of being a parent and such. Some people maybe have negative attitudes toward you, but more and more, what I realized was that my children were what they were dealing with, and was I, as a white father and us as white parents, able to provide them with what they needed growing up as young black people in America.
That's big. What's big to me is that you guys were open to it, but I guess I'm super curious about it, because my grandfather was an orphan, and he lived in an orphanage here in the state of Tennessee, in Chattanooga, the Steele Home for Orphaned Children. Elmira Steele from Massachusetts had built this orphanage in Chattanooga, and so he was raised by this white woman in an orphanage in Chattanooga. She made that choice. He always had this sense of vacancy, they tell me, because orphans, why didn't they want me?
Right.
Right? That's one of those things. So I wonder what you guys wanted kids, and you weren't gonna let the issue of race get in the way of humanity. Like, these are kids, we want to love them. They need love. They deserve our love. We want the love that comes from being in a family. What do your children say to you about the experience? Because, okay, we come to Knoxville, 2001. That puts them at, I don't know.
Well, my daughter was going into sophomore year in high school. She's the oldest one. My older son was in middle school. My youngest son then was in, I guess, 4th grade or so.
What did they tell you about this experience?
My kids don't talk much about being adopted. They all 3 were adopted as children, as babies, this is all they know, okay?
Right.
And it's not that they shy away.
Are they siblings?
No.
Okay.
No, we sit around the dinner table and none of us have any genetic relationship, I mean, other than being people,
Gotcha.
And, but they're not real outspoken about it. We have, through the years, and particularly early on, we talked to them a lot. We talked to them about their adoption story, as they call it, and about their birth parents, but and not that we know much about their birth parents, but they seem to have accepted that this is their life and that they have parents, that we are their parents. And I don't think they ever really question that. We've always said if you ever want to search, we would be happy to assist if there's a way that we can assist. If you'd like to have any kind of reunion with, or attempt to have any kind of reunion with your birth parents, then we would try to help. None of them to date have wanted to pursue that, but they may at some point. And if they do, then we'd be happy to try to help them.
There's your novel, by the way.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what you will write having lived this life and lived this experience, number one. Number two, as you look at social issues as a newspaper editor in America, boy, do you have a unique prism, or I know you to be very diligent in what you do, so I wouldn't imagine you allow your experience to cloud your judgment, but it certainly informs your judgment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about that.
Sure.
In part 2 of our interview with Jack McElroy, here's what I'm going to ask him, and you'll see this on the next episode. Do you keep a journal? And don't answer now, right? I want to know in the next episode. Do you keep a journal? And have you been writing about this? Are you going to write a book about this experience? Okay. And by the way, when we were talking newspaper and growing up, your face looked totally different. But when we started talking about your kids, something happened. And I want to figure out what that is.
Okay.
All right. We'll see you next time on Anything is Possible.